Shemai Palp, hi everyone, and today I'm presenting a video that's been on my list of things to do for about 3 years now, how to use ND filters, the stuff of magic. The optical manufacturer Irix offered to loan me some of their new extra dark ND filters for testing, and also loaned me for a while an ultra wide angle lens to use with them, so I thought that now could be a really good time to finally make this video. Thanks for your help, Irix. Now, a neutral density filter is one of those accessories for people who want to get a bit more adventurous with their photography rather than being an essential piece of kit. Just from looking at one, you can guess pretty quickly that the idea behind them is simply to reduce the amount of light that is reaching your camera, and ideally without adding any extra color tint or unwanted image effects to your picture, hence the name neutral density filter. When I bought my first digital SLR camera and started practicing photography, I could not understand the idea of ND filters. I was obsessed with getting bright aperture lenses for my new camera, which would let in as much light as possible, and in my inexperienced head, I couldn't imagine any situation when I'd want to actually reduce that amount of light. But there are loads of situations where a neutral density filter can be very helpful to use. There are reasons you might want to actually slow down your camera's shutter speeds. Let's take a quick look at some of those reasons now, and what happens when you use your camera with an ND filter and a tripod. Perhaps most evocatively, ND filters allow you to get the slow shutter speeds required for more movement blur in your images. For example, if you're into landscape photography in the sky above you. For this effect, you'll need to be shooting in partially cloudy conditions with a bit of wind, preferably blowing to or away from you. If the sky features heavily in the image, then a long exposure of at least a minute or so can bring beautiful movement into the clouds you can see, or just soften them up a bit. Try using a polarizing filter in conjunction with your ND filter to darken the blue of the sky and further emphasize the effect. You'll want to use an ND2000 filter at the very least for this effect, preferably an ND4000 filter or maybe even darker. ND filters will also, of course, allow you to get movement blur on water by exactly the same principle as before, and it can work to beautiful effect, particularly if you're shooting in the morning or evening and the light is a little moody and the sea is a bit choppy. Again though, you'll want an exposure of at least 1 minute, ideally longer. So you'll need an ND2000 or 4000 filter at least for this, ideally even darker, like ND8000 or 16000. Slow shutter speeds can also be used to get moving people out of your pictures, if you're shooting in a town or a city. Here's a normal picture of the little Welsh town of Cardigan, complete with lots of people and cars all over the place, and here, in a picture taken a moment later, the people are removed. With an ND filter, if your exposure is long enough, say a minute or two, then people who are moving around in your pictures will disappear. For this effect, you'll need the darkest ND filter you can get, really. I used Irix's extremely dark ND32000 filter in this case to really slow down that exposure. Now, as well as being useful for still photography, ND filters are very commonly used by professional video makers. Normally, when you're shooting video on a bright day, if you want to use a wide aperture on your lens for creative reasons, i.e. to get your background out of focus, then so much light will be coming into your camera that you'll be forced to use a very fast shutter speed, in this case 1/8000th of a second. This gives your footage a bit of an unnatural look, like you're shooting an action sequence on a James Bond movie, even though it's really just some footage of someone juggling a rather meagre 2 limes. An ND filter is therefore really useful for filmmakers to slow down their shutter speeds whenever necessary, in this case to lovely natural 1/50th of a second. An ND512 or ND1000 filter would be really ideal for this, although you can always use a darker filter and increase your ISO level. This is the very reason a lot of professional video cameras include built-in ND filters. There are more uses for ND filters, but the final one that I can think of is to facilitate using a flash outdoors. In this picture taken on a sunny day, things are looking pretty ugly with harsh shadows all over my subject. This is why portrait photographers do not enjoy working on bright sunny days. Now, if I want to fill those shadows out with a flash, my camera's fastest flash sync speed means I can't shoot with a shutter speed faster than 1/180th of a second. This varies a little depending on your camera. It's so bright outside that in order to slow down my shutter speed enough, I need to stop down my aperture to f9. But wait, there goes my lovely out of focus background that I wanted. So instead of stopping down the aperture, I can use an ND filter to slow down my shutter speed, and here's the result. Quite nice. That's a handy technique for wedding photographers. For this technique, an ND32 or ND64 filter is ideal. So those are some of their uses. Now let's take a very quick look at the terminology here, because ND filters are termed differently by different companies, which can be confusing. On the left, you can see the f-stop reduction that the filter offers. One f-stop reduction means that the amount of light through the lens is halved. 2 f-stops means that there's a quarter the amount of light coming through. 3 f-stops of reduction means 1/8 the amount of light, and so on. Feel free to pause the video at this point to take a good look at this information. It'll decode those filter strengths for you. Now, not all ND filters are created equally, they do vary in quality and price. Not many ND filters actually affect image sharpness nowadays, but some ND filters can introduce an unwanted color cast to your image or vignetting in the corners. If they're not coded well enough, then they can introduce extra flaring effects to your images too, and different brands also have different build quality. I'm not in a position to make many recommendations for the best filter brands here, as I haven't really tried that many. Maybe one day I'll do a big comparison review. Hoya and Stingray filters have a good reputation, Tiffin filters do not. The Irix filters I used for these videos were, admittedly, very good. I was genuinely impressed with them. The most extreme filter of theirs, the ND32000, had no real effect on sharpness in my images. It seemed to have a slightly red colour tint to it, but for such a very dark filter it wasn't bad. And also, it didn't seem to introduce much vignetting to my pictures, so I was really pleased with its results. They're nice and thin, they're solidly put together, and they seem to have an excellent coating on them. I think I can quite happily recommend them. Some of you might ask about variable ND filters. I've tried them before, but only quite cheap ones, and I had a bad experience with them. They gave strong color casts and a crazy patterning effect at darker settings. But maybe one day I'll explore more expensive variable ND filters and make a review. I'm sure there must be some good ones out there. But for now, anyone who loves their photography and owns a tripod will find that a carefully used dark ND filter can really give a new twist to your pictures, especially if you love landscape or urban photography.